So you just got finished watching Mr. Clifford's supply video, introducing you to that. Go back to the graphic that I created for you that helps review what the shifters are that he presented to you. On the right then, we have our supply curve shifters. Remember, when supply curves shift to the right, that means they're increasing. When the curves shift to the left, that means they're decreasing. 5 reasons that supply could be shifting is 1, a change in technology. 2, a government policy like a tax or a subsidy. 3, a producer expectation. 4, a change in the price of resources needed to make the product. Or lastly, a change in the number of suppliers. So keeping those things in mind, let's take the 5 shifters and let's actually graph them out when supply curves are shifting. And so I have a supply practice activity that I typically do in class with the students. So we'll do that now. You don't have to download anything. You can just use this video as your reference. And we're going to go through 8 examples like we did with the demand practice that we did in a previous video. So first, let's focus on number 7. We're going to imagine that we're producers of paper and that the prices of paper are falling. So that means that the product that we produce itself, the price is changing, but our cost to produce the paper hasn't changed at all. All we're looking at is a change in the price of the product. And so since that is occurring, there's no change in cost to manufacture. The supply curve is not shifting. There's just movement along the curve. Now remember, Mr. Clifford talked about that about a minute into his video that you just watched. So there is no change on this. So that's number 7, also known as movement. Number 8, imagine we're manufacturing cigarettes, and the event that we're given in number 8 is the government increases the tax that cigarette producers have to pay. So as producers, we have a new tax that we have to give the government. That's going to cost us more to produce cigarettes, which means that we are not going to be able to produce as many as we could before due to this government policy. It's going to cause our supply curve to shift to the left. So we draw an arrow from the original curve and draw a new curve and label it S with the next number up. So S1. Number 9, we're producing widgets. And there's new software out there that increases widget production. So if we're looking at, is that causing a shift? Well, yeah, it is. It's reducing the cost to produce it. So we have a technological advance that's going to allow us to increase our production. So supply curve for widgets will shift to the right. So we draw a new curve, label it S1. Now let's take a look at number 10. We're manufacturing wheat, and the price of what we manufacture is expected to fall next week. The key word is expected. So whereas in the first one with paper was movement, this one is not movement because we're only thinking that it's going to change. So since there's that expectation, we're going to increase our supply now and try to sell as much as possible before the price falls. We want to get rid of it at that higher price. So the supply is going to increase, shift to the right. Moving down to number 11. Imagine we are producing sugar and we are told that a new trade agreement eliminates sugar quotas. Now the key to this one is understanding what a quota is. A quota is a maximum amount of a good allowed into a place at a given time. So if the government said only 2 million tons of sugar is allowed into the country a year, that's going to create a limit on the number of suppliers. When they eliminate the quota now, as much sugar can be brought in from another country, like say Cuba, which is going to increase the supply of sugar in the market. We're going to have more sellers. So that's going to cause an increase to the supply curve. As you can see, it shifts to the right. Number 12, we're going to be creating furniture. And the event is that the price of lumber rises. Now, lumber is a resource in producing some furniture. And so since one of our resources has become more expensive, we're not going to be able to create as many pieces of furniture as we could before. So the cost of a resource has caused the curve to shift, and it's going to be shifting to the left since we're looking at a decrease. So draw an arrow to the left, New curve, label it S1. Number 13, we are producing cell phones, and we find that there are high profits in our industry that increases the number of manufacturers of cell phone producers. So we have more sellers than we did before. When you bring more sellers into the market, that means that we're going to have more cell phones than we did before. So the shifter is number of sellers has increased. It's going to increase the supply, so that curve is going to shift to the right. So we'll draw an arrow to the right. And our new curve. And last one, we are producing computers. We are outsourcing jobs to reduce labor costs. So our cost to produce computers is getting cheaper, which means we can use some of our resources to make more computers than before. So we have a change in the cost of producing, or change in the price of resources, which means we're going to increase computer production. So that curve is going to shift to the right. Draw a new curve. And we have S1. Now, something I want to point out to you while I can here, just to finish up the video, is I understand that supply curves visually are a little trickier to understand than demand curves, because when there's an increase, as you see in number 11, for example, down here, it almost appears to many students that the new supply curve is lower than the old one. And that's not really true. Yes, the prices will be lower, but the quantity supplied is shifting to the right, which is the increase, and that's really what we're focused on when we're talking about increases or decreases in supply. So number 12, we have a decrease in supply, but when you look at the new curve that I drew, a lot of students sometimes will think, oh wait, that's an increase. And it's pretty easy when I'm talking about it or demonstrating it and pointing it out to students, but when it comes time to take a test and you're given a completed graph and you're asked, is this graph showing a supply increase or decrease? You probably wouldn't be surprised at the number of students who will tell me that something like number 12 is an increase because they think the new supply curve is higher than the old one. Don't focus on higher or lower, focus on left or right. Left is a decrease, right's an increase, same as it was for demand. If you can keep that straight, I think you'll be in pretty good shape as far as mastering the I can statements for demand and supply. Your assignment will come up next, and I will have just some short directions on that. So let's take a look at your assignment. Supply, day 2. You have 10 graphs that you're going to be looking at and events that go along with each graph, and you're going to be asked to identify whether that supply curve is shifting to the right and increasing, or whether that event is causing the curve to shift to the left and decreasing. You can use the list of 5 shifters from earlier in this video. Refer back to that when you're doing this assignment. That might be helpful for you. We'll look at number 1 together, and then I'm going to allow you to work on the rest of them on your own. The other thing that I should note about the assignment for you is that when we originally put this into digital form, and you'll see this, you have the first page is oriented in this fashion. This is called the landscape orientation, but page 2 is in portrait. So you may need to lock your screen on your iPad if you're using an iPad to fill out that second page, or else you may have to like lay on your side to do it or something goofy, but I'm sure you'll figure out a way to make it work. Anyway, number 1 here, what we're told, and ignore this direction here. Don't worry about pages 119 to 120 of student text. This came from different workbook. It says, use the graph on the right to answer question 1. We can assume that this supply curve, S1, is illustrating the supply of gas-guzzling cars before legislation, or a law, in other words, was passed. So we're told the government passes a law, legislation, that puts a $500 tax on cars that get less than 20 miles per gallon. Draw the change in supply for gas-guzzling cars. So the government's now making it more expensive for auto manufacturers to make gas-guzzling cars, cars that get less than 20 miles per gallon. So I think the logical thing to think about that is that they're not going to make as many of those cars because it's going to cost them too much. So we're going to see the supply curve shift to the left or decrease. So we would want to take it and draw an arrow pointing to the left like I did in the previous video and draw a new supply curve here. Instead of labeling it S1, we'll have to label it S2 because right here they already have this labeled as S1, and just the logical way to do it is if you're showing me something that is next in line, you got to give it the next number up. The other piece is what factor caused the shift in the supply curve. And this is where I would direct you back to the 5 shifters that we had in our previous notes on this video. The factor that caused this supply shift, well, the government passing a law would be a government policy. So you just write in government policy here, and you're done with question 1. When you go to question 2, you're going to find there's another government law, so that's going to be a government law factor, and you read through that and tell me what's going to happen to the supply curve. Is it going to increase the supply, or is it going to decrease the supply of whatever's in the question there? As you go through this, if you get stuck anywhere or need clarifications, please message me. Looking things over right now, I'm just seeing if there's any in particular that tend to give students trouble. I'd say these ones, when you talk about expectations, remember, just think about it from the perspective of someone that's going to sell a home based on the situation for 9 or 10. Would the event make you want to sell your home now before the event occurs, or would you want to hang on to your home and wait for the event to occur? It's the best advice I can give.